Article 36. The Security Council shall be empowered at any stage of a dispute of the nature referred to in Article 33 or a situation of a similar nature to recommend the appropriate procedure or methods of settlement. The Security Council takes into account any procedure for the settlement of this dispute which had already been adopted by the parties. In making recommendations under this article, the Security Council also takes into account that disputes of a legal nature should, as a general rule, be referred by the parties in the International Court of Justice in accordance with the provisions of the statute of the court. We believe that the United Nations is not again in international law. Due to the fact that the bodies of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were not demarcated, the active phase of hostilities took place on the territory of the USSR by the occupying forces of the Trading Corporation Ukraine, which is not part of the founders of the United Nations, which began hostilities in 2014 by default and with the inactivity of the participants, United Nations representatives, who criminally turned a blind eye to the genocide of the population and did not provide assistance in resisting Nazism to the population living on the territory of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The main principles and tasks of the existence of the United Nations organization are called into question as an organization for the settlement of peace in all territories that are part of the United Nations Charter and not included. For a commercial corporation that is not a member of the United Nations, Ukraine doesn't have the right to protect this organization. This is contrary to the United Nations Charter, since the people, the nation and the corporation Ukraine is absent. We are citizens of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics residing on the territory of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic on the basis of a referendum of March 17, 1991 on the non-termination of the sovereign state of the USSR, guided by the total number of votes in the referendum in favor of preserving the USSR state, not related to the Russian Federation, Russian corporations. We prohibit and impose a veto on any arms delivered on the territory of the USSR, including to all constituent republics of the USSR, ISFSR, since the territory of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, is not an administrative unit, but a sovereign state. Soviet multinational people, citizens of the USSR and the Union republics, have nothing to do with Articles 73 and 74 of the United Nations Charter, a single conspiracy to destroy and genocide against the Soviet multinational people and citizens of the USSR on the territory of the ISFSR. We state in an open text, citizens of the USSR as ISFSR are no longer under guardianship and are not guided by the chapters of the United Nations Charter. Chapter 12, International Guardianship System. Article 75. The United Nations shall establish under its authority an international system of trusteeship to administer and supervise such territories as may be included in it by subsequent individual agreements. These territories are hereinafter referred to as trust territories. Article 76. The main objectives of the trusteeship system, in accordance with the purposes of the United Nations, set out in Article 1 of this Constitution, are strengthen international peace and security, to promote the political, economic, and social progress of the people of the trust territories, their progress in education, and their progressive development towards self-government or independence, as may be appropriate for the specific conditions of each territory and its peoples, and bearing in mind the freely expressed desire of these peoples, and how this may be covered by the terms of each custody agreement. Encourage respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction of race, sex, language, religion, and encourage recognition of the interdependence of the peoples of the world. To ensure equal treatment of members and their citizens in the social, economic, and commercial fields, as well as equal treatment for them in the administration of justice, without prejudice to the achievement of the above objectives and subject to the provisions of Article 80. Article 77. The trusteeship system extends to such territories from the following categories, which may be included in it by trusteeship agreements. Territories currently under the mandate, territories that may be torn away from enemy states as a result of the Second World War, and territories voluntarily included in the trusteeship system by the states responsible for their administration. The question of which of the territories listed above should be included in the trust system and under what conditions will be the subject of a subsequent agreement. Article 78. The system of trusteeship does not apply to countries that have become members of the organization, relations between which must be based on respect for the principle of sovereign equality. Article 79. The terms of trust for each territory to be included in the trust system, including all changes and amendments, are determined by agreements of the states directly concerned, including mandate holders, in the event that the territories are under the mandate of one of the members of the organization, and are approved as provided in Articles 83 and 85. Article 80. Except as may be agreed in individual trusteeship agreements entered into under Sections 77, 79, and 81, incorporating each territory into a trust system, and pending the conclusion of such agreements, nothing in this chapter shall be construed as modifying in any way any rights of any states or any peoples, or the terms of existing international agreements to which the members of the organization respectively may be parties. Paragraph 1 of this article shall not be construed as giving grounds for delaying or postponing the negotiations and conclusion of agreements for the inclusion of mandated and other territories in the system of trust as provided for in Article 77. Article 81. The trust agreement in each case must include the terms under which the trust area will be administered, as well as determine the authority that will administer the trust area. Such authority, hereinafter referred to as the administering authority, may be one or more states or the United Nations as such. Article 82. Any trusteeship agreement may define a strategic area or areas which may include part or all of the trust area covered by the agreement without prejudice to any special agreement or agreements entered into under Article 43. Article 83. All functions of the United Nations relating to strategic areas, including the approval of the terms of trusteeship agreements and their modifications, or amendments are carried out by the Security Council. The main objectives set out in Article 76 apply to the people of each of the strategic areas. The Security Council, subject in the term of the trusteeship agreements and without prejudice to security requirements, shall be assisted by the Trusteeship Council to carry out those functions of the United Nations in accordance with the trusteeship system, which relate to political, economic and social matters, as well as questions in the field of education in strategic areas. Article 84. It is the duty of the administering authority to ensure that the trust area plays its part in the maintenance of international peace and security. For this purpose, the administering authority shall be empowered to use volunteer armed forces, facilities and assistance from the trust area in fulfilling the obligations assumed by the administering authority in this regard to the Security Council, as well as for local defense and the maintenance of law and order within the trust area. Article 85. The functions of the United Nations in relation to trusteeship agreements for all main strategic areas, including the approval of the terms of trusteeship agreements and their modifications of amendments, are carried out by the General Assembly. The Trusteeship Council, acting under the direction of the General Assembly, assists the General Assembly in the performance of their functions. Chapter 8, Trusteeship Council, Article 86. The Trusteeship Council is composed of the following members of the United Nations: those members of the organization who administer trust areas, those members of the organization named in Article 23 who do not administer trust areas. Such number of other members of the organization elected by the General Assembly for a term of 3 years as may be necessary to ensure that the total number of members of the Trusteeship Council is distributed equally among the members of the organization administering and not administering trust territories. Each member of the Trust Council will appoint one specially qualified person to be his representative on the Trusteeship Council. The right to vote was confirmed by a referendum voting for the preservation of the sovereign state of the USSR on March 17, 1991, including the revocation of Memorandum Number OR 2338, dated on the 24th of December 1991, on renaming the Republic of the СССР to the Russian Federation, which did not exist at the time the memorandum was made, and had the authority signatory to publish such letters for the international field. Since the Charter of the Trading Corporation of the Russian Federation, Russia remained a draft dated on the 12th of December 1993. The people of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics on the territory of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic are active, alive, claiming their rights to the status of representatives, founders of the sovereign state. More citizens of the sovereign state of the USSR do not need guardianship. We demand to stop the supply of weapons of all forms for the administrative unit of Ukraine, misled by the regulator, including by the unprincipled acts of the United Nations, who colluded to achieve selfish goals and destroy nations and commit genocide of the fraternal Slavian peoples. To announce the states that are part of the founders of the United Nations Charter at the next meeting of the participants of the United Nations members in connection with the application for renunciation of guardianship by any false administrative formations, specialized institutions, based on the will of the people living on their territory, the Soviet multinational deep-rooted people, citizens of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the territory of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, no longer need OPEC. We demand the cessation of hostilities associated with the NWO Special Military Operation Program on the territory of the USSR, Ukrainian SSR, and the withdrawal of all private military companies from the territory of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the supply of weapons for them. After delivery by the responsible executor, at the announcement of the resolution, appoint Antonio Guterres and voice the demands at the next United Nations meeting, but no later than in June 2023.